Well, I want to know how it is that you fit that mustache underneath a mask, social distancing and whatnot.
I don't. I'm not being safe over here, man. I don't have to be. I got like 100 people around here. We're good.
So we're here with John Michels from Black Pearl, and you guys have a great podcast coming to you. So make sure you guys stay tuned for all this, and we're going to get into it.
I hear you.
How's the weather, Dave? It looks nice out there right now.
Oh, yeah. It's actually quite nice today. 70s or 80s? Yeah, 70s.
That's great.
Yeah. Got a little flipping in yesterday. Found some animals. Pretty happy.
Where are you located?
Missouri.
All right. So your area is just starting with all that road cut rock flipping.
Pretty much. Went moving around my neighborhood the other day. Found a couple piles of tin next to some barns that got deserted. Rat snakes, ringnecks, milk snakes right now. I'm sure a lot of other stuff's going to start coming out soon, but we had snow on the ground about a week and a half ago.
Yeah, you guys had a cold snap, pretty recently, and it's just starting to warm up, right?
Yeah, it's been dog shit here, man. It gives you think it's springtime, and then it's just not springtime.
Yeah, I've done a couple herping trips to eastern Kansas and all that. I was actually had a trip scheduled to go out there with my daughter, but life got crazy, so we're just hanging out here.
Nice. You got a couple people out there you normally hook up with and do some looking around, or
yeah, I mean, I'm as big a field herp guy as I am a captive guy, but Southern California, it's kind of crazy, so it's but life happens too. You get your job, I got my second job going, and then you got a wife and kids and whatever. I don't get out nearly as much as I used to, and that's fine. But really, when I get out, there's a lot of like paranoia about, keeping spots to yourself and stuff like that. And I'm turning into one of the old grumpy people who gets mad at the young Instagram kids that go up and tear up your spots and all that. So I don't know. I got 2 or 3 guys I hang out with, and that's about it. I'm pretty closed circle.
No, I get that. I'm kind of new to the States, so I've been lucky enough I got put on a few spots by a few friends, but for the most part, I get lucky on the road sometimes. I got put on some good spots in Oklahoma. I got a guy up in Kansas City I'm going to start herping with in about a week or two, and he's going to head down my way, but I got like 3 or 4 more species that I need to see in the state that I haven't seen yet, and then just going to start the whole process over again.
Well, I know just in my little bit of playing around out there, I don't know, I haven't gone too far into Missouri, but at least in Kansas, I mean, it's just driving around the back roads and looking to find, looking for the rock cuts that have got the flat rocks. And this time of year, like there's snakes under all of them,
Every last one of them, man. Ringneck under every single one of it. It gets almost annoying after a little while, but
yeah, it does. But the milk's popping up, and there are a few things still that I haven't seen yet. I haven't seen any hognoses, or I haven't seen a Massasauga yet. Just kind of some of the little lesser known stuff.
Yeah, Massasauga in the state I haven't seen yet. I seen him in Oklahoma City when I was road cruising. The road we were on, it was common to see Atrox, and we ended up seeing 2 Massasaugas instead.
I'll take that.
I've seen the Eastern hognose here, not quite a few, probably about 6 or 7, and nothing on the westerns yet. There's like one very small area to actually find them in. I know where the area is, but it's best to do it in October. They call it Hogtober here. It's so good.
Right. Yeah. I know I look for hognoses a little bit in southeastern Arizona. Nice. That's the Mexican hogs, and that's kind of the I like to go in September and early October. That's when they're out more for me anyway.
Really nice. Are you friends with Dan Eby?
Yeah, I know Dan. Okay. We haven't met personally, but we're internet friends.
Okay, well, that's cool. I think years ago when I saw you for the first time at one of the California shows, your table stood out, and God, did you have double head sable lavenders on your table like 4 years ago, or was that a project?
I had a brief stint in the hognose world. I've been doing the Indigos and Cribos for so long that I don't want to say I got bored. That's kind of the wrong word, but I get a little restless sometimes, and start a little side project to this or that or whatever. So I had a brief stint in the hognose world, and for as a connection to, you know, kind of the people that are into the morph thing. My intention when I approached all that was kind of go big or go home, but I didn't want to reproduce a bunch of like the same morph that everybody has. I didn't want to, you know, create, you know, 50 sables a year. My plan with all that stuff was to just immediately start making hets that nobody had. And so the first thing I did when I got my first sable from Dan, EB, who we were talking about, is I immediately bred it to a lavender, because to my knowledge at the time, I don't know what's going on today, but at the time nobody had a visual lavender sable. So instead of buying a pair of sables and pumping them out, I wanted to create hets that could make me something that nobody had. And so I started tying the sable into anything that was not sable, you know. So I didn't want to do the sunburst thing because Dan had already done, you know, the albino sable stuff. And so I put sables to lavenders, and I put sables to frost stuff, the frosted hypos, which is the caramel and the what's the other thing? The other gene in there? I'm blanking.
Oh man, well, we did the hognose thing last week. I mean, there's a few different lineage of hypo, T positive.
Well, either way, I took some of the European stuff that they had and started, you know, putting the stables into that, and unfortunately, I kind of lost my motivation and interest with the hognose stuff before some of that stuff, you know, bore fruit and came to fruition. So the double het sable lavender stuff you're referring to, I ended up selling those, and I don't know if the guys I sold them to ever actually produced a visual. You might know better than I did, but my really only gratification with playing that whole morph game was that, to my knowledge anyway, I was the first one to produce what I called the toasted caramel, which was a sable caramel, a visual sable caramel, which I sold to Kyle in the UK, and I know he's got that male raised up and ready to start breeding to things now. So I've got one, again, to my knowledge, world's first to my name, but I was able to do that before I got out of the hognoses and just went back to my Drymarchon.
Oh, really cool. You know, another reason, of course, for bringing up Dan Eby is, you know, again, a real big field herper. You know, he's good friends with my buddy Junior, and that's one guy that I'd like to try to meet up with sometimes, actually get out there and do some flipping.
Sure.
He finds some crazy stuff at some times of the year. You wouldn't even think you'd find any animals out there.
Yeah.
But, yeah, definitely a unique guy. And like I said, the Sable Project's really a cool animal. We picked up a couple ourselves a few years ago, and kind of like what you did, but unfortunately a lot has already been done. We're kind of putting it through a bunch of random stuff. Right. But I think that project has legs. You know, it's unfortunate you're not dealing with it anymore, but at the same time, you got more interesting things happening, so I don't blame you.
Yeah, well, you know, it's my bread and butter is what it is, and that's good, and it's fun to kind of dabble in side projects here and there. I've got some different ones going now, but the hogs were fun for a while, and I really like the sable stuff. I kind of got out before I got invested in the Arctic stuff, you know, but there are so many hognose morphs that are sort of very similar in coloration as far as albinos and the toffee bellies and the caramels, and, you know, just that sort of light amelanistic, hypomelanistic kind of look. You know, so that's why I really gravitated towards the sable stuff, because then you had a morph that was a dark morph, you know, and then you thought it'd be cool to start tying that into all the light stuff and creating combos that way. So that was the thinking and the philosophy.
There's nothing wrong with that logic back then. I think it's a very unique morph. It's definitely one of my favorites in hognose. And I think the lavender sable, I think, got done in Europe first. I believe they called it the Moonstone. And since then, I know Junior, I believe at JMG, has made, I know he's got a couple other genes in there. I know for sure he's got possibly Arctic in there, and he might have actually got Conda in there also. I'm not sure what he's made. I don't want to spit out a bunch of names because he might have made all that stuff and doesn't want me to tell anybody. So I'm just going to go ahead and play dumb, but he's done a little bit with that project.
Cool, man. Cool stuff.
But yeah, well, you guys got some questions for him. Let's we'll jump back into field herping later. I want to talk about that a little more.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fun. Ryan sent a huge list of questions that maybe you can start pulling from some of them.
Well, I mean, I think probably the best place to start is tell us about you. Who are you? Who is Black Pearl? Like, I know you have done a couple interviews in the past, but like, as cool as the animals that you work with are, you don't hear a lot about it, on social media anyway. So I'd like to introduce our audience to who you are and what you work with.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so, I started out the same way I guess a lot of people did. And that was kind of field herping and just being a kid and running around and catching snakes and, doing all that kind of stuff. I grew up in Southern California. So I'd be out catching king snakes and gopher snakes and whatever. And, I was a teenager and I started having fun just, breeding those. My dad, would tell me, hey, look, you can keep whatever you want as long as it's not venomous. You don't spend money on it. So I used to go out and just grab a couple gopher snakes and throw them in a cage and, and you're just playing around and, they would produce eggs, And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. So I started hatching out, baby gopher snakes and, I'd just take the parents and the babies and just release them back in the wild where I caught them, kind of a thing, which I guess is technically not legal anymore, but either way, it's just a kid playing around, having a good time. And, and then as I got a little older, I kept field herping, but then I saw some of my buddies were, breeding things like gray banded king snakes and, milk snakes and whatever else. I thought, well, that's kind of cool. So when I kind of started having my own money and, wasn't living under dad's rules, that I went out and bought a couple things. And it was very kind of strategic that I wanted to be able to breed something where the babies were not a pain to get feeding, because I didn't feel like my experience level was there yet, and that they didn't get huge and want to be, breeding anacondas or anything. So I chose Honduran milk snakes. And so I bought a handful of those, and I got some from my old friend Shannon Brown, who's now passed on, and started breeding some of the morphs of the Honduran milk snakes. And I thought that was pretty cool. And my idea all along was it was just playing around, and I was working with snakes that I thought were neat, and then I could sell them. And so I started selling some of the babies of all that, and I didn't pocket any of it. Any of the money that I would make off of snakes would go to feeding the mice. And then I started producing enough snakes where it was, giving me more money than I needed for the rodents. So then I would just buy more snakes with it. So after the first year or two, I never really spent any pocket money on snakes, but every dime that I would make would get sort of reinvested in reptile related stuff. And, and then I came across the Drymarchon genus, and they were just totally fascinating to me that they were large. They're not constrictors, but they're just so alert and so active and so inquisitive and interactive. And I thought it was just the coolest thing, ever. So there was somebody local who had an adult pair of blacktail cribos that he wanted to sell. So I bought those, and I immediately got a big clutch of eggs, and I admittedly had no idea what I was doing with them,
Wow.
And I had people lining up wanting to buy them. And here I am with 20 babies that I had no idea how to get feeding and all of that. So this learning curve was really steep when it got to that point, but I figured it out. And from there, it just went nuts. I mean, I just completely became addicted with that genus of snakes, the Drymarchon genus, Indigos and Cribos. And so all the money I made selling those baby blacktails, I bought a pair of yellowtails and I bought a pair of Eastern Indigos, and just started building my collection up from there. And then the goal became I wanted a breeding group of all 6 of the major Drymarchon subspecies. And I started along that path. And around that time, I met who's now my business partner, Chris, and he had some of the Mexican indigos, which I thought were really cool. And his collection was roughly the same size as mine. We hit it off. We're field herping buddies. We're good friends. And so, I mean, that was 15 years ago. And now we are 100% business partners along, every step of the way. All the finances, all the collection, all the care, all the money going in and out. We do it all together 50-50. And which is nice because we've been able to basically double both of our collections in one. And it also gives us more flexibility with the capital if we need to go out and buy an expensive snake or buy someone's collection out or whatever else, that we can do that. We have that sort of liquidity and flexibility. And so we did that for a good, 6 or 8 years. We're just producing, a ton of baby Indigos and Cribos and not pocketing any of it. And every penny got reinvested. It was buying the proper caging, expanding, getting higher quality animals of each of the major subspecies. And we really wanted to hone it down till we had, really top-notch animals of each of the major subspecies and a big breeding group of each one. And it really wasn't until, a few years ago that we got to a point where we grew as big as we were going to grow, and we didn't want to grow any larger. And then that's when it kind of became a business. But it was a 10-year journey to get to that point where we're actually something you would consider more of a business than a hobby.
Wow, that's impressive.
That's
impressive
cool.
Journey. We were really interested. One of the reasons that we reached out to you is because we really do enjoy the animals that you keep. We had a pair of blacktail Cribos for a little while. When we kind of first started R&B Reptiles, we bought a pair from Brian Barczyk, actually, and of young ones. Was it from him? No, it was with him. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. It was at Tinley. There was a lady selling them, and we bought a pair from her, and Brian bought the other 2 pairs she had, something like that. Mm-hmm. So, and he had a pair of adults that we got to handle. We were like, oh, this is really cool. And we got them, and we had them for about a year, and we said, oh man, we were all the animals are at Ryan's house. And so we were kind of moving. I guess that was when we were about to move. Ryan was about to move to the place he's at now. And we were like, we don't really have the space to, upgrade. And so we sold them, and we've regretted it ever since. But we've always been interested. And now we're like at a point where like, oh, we want to get back into these. And so we're always looking. And just when we watch some of the videos of, let's just even the Mexican reds and just indigos and all, it's awesome. So you got us really excited, and you probably didn't know it that you got us really excited about some of the species that you keep. So I know everybody asks you like, what's your favorite in the Drymarchon? What would you say is your favorite?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very difficult question to answer. I can tell you that I have. There's a difference. The question is do I have a favorite animal or a favorite subspecies? My favorite animal, that I can answer. I have a yellowtail Cribo, who is, I think, the 3rd Drymarchon I ever owned. His name's Orion, and he's I think he's 17 years old, somewhere along there, and he's 8.5 feet long, and he's not necessarily friendly, but he and I get along well enough. He's not really for anyone to go in and pick up, but he's a stud, man. He's one of my favorite snakes, and he's a snake where even when he's not producing babies or whatever else it is, and it's time for him to retire from the breeding part, that he's one that I wouldn't be able to part with. Orion's my favorite snake. That being said, as far as the famous or my favorite subspecies or whatever, I've said blacktails in the past. I love the eye markings. I love the contrast between the top part of the body and the blacktail. I think if you wanted to, I don't know, is it called that my favorite? I think it certainly spent time as my favorite. There are times when I'm really just in awe over the Mexican indigos as well. The variability that we're starting to produce with the Mexican indigos, the different looks, is just awesome. So when I go out to my snake room now and I want to just kind of, do what we all do and just kind of take a look and enjoy over our collection, those are kind of the ones that I'm checking out now lately. So it does more from kind of one one type to another, depending on what's going on with all the various projects.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I want to hear.
One thing that really I find curious about Drymarchon in general is especially being somebody who's been wanting to buy into different projects of it over the years, you almost never find them advertised, but they're always sold out. Do you have any insight into that? Like how's this going down? And nobody's talking about it, but they're always sold out.
Well, look, so I mean, this was accidental at first, and then it became deliberate later. But from a business perspective, this is, Indigos and Cribos. They're no offense to anybody who does whatever else, but they're not corn snakes, and they're not hognoses or whatever it is. They're not easy to breed. And it's something that my partner and I figured out, and a lot of other people have figured it out too. It's not like there's any special secret, but in the hands of the average reptile keeper, most people are not successful in producing consistent year after year large clutches of these snakes. Absolutely. And so with that, the supply is very low. Mm-hmm. There are not many people out there that are offering them. And there are a couple people here and there that produce a clutch or two a year, and that's kind of what happens. And there are some bigger breeders that are kind of more off the radar that you haven't really heard of. But it's when you have a very low supply, then the prices are higher, and you don't need to work. Maybe this is the wrong thing to say, but I spent a lot of time in the early years of Black Pearl doing a lot of more of the social media thing and building the website and taking cool photos and going to the shows and educating people and whatever. And it's to a point now where I don't need to advertise. So I haven't advertised in years. And, it's through the years for various things that we've done, people come to me to be able to buy that kind of thing. And I don't really need to advertise, and I don't really discount prices. I don't really give people deals because things sell for what I think is appropriate, and I don't really need to work to do that. To refer back to what David and I were talking about earlier, when I did a brief stint in the hognose world, when I wanted to try to sell whatever baby hognoses I was producing, I had to work at it. I had to advertise, and I had to talk to people because nobody comes to me for hognose things, Mm-hmm. But there are hognose breeders that don't advertise either, and they don't really need to because people know who they are and they know to go to that guy for hognoses. So I personally don't need to advertise. We've spent a lot of years building the exposure and the reputation that we have, and so people come to me, for that. But if I wanted to do a different side project and something else, it would be a different story, and I'd have to advertise.
Yeah. So what Ryan's really saying is, how can we get on the list, the waiting list? Yeah. I feel like.
Well, you know what? This was actually I did something different this year, and I'm watching to see how it all plays out. But just kind of playing with that is that I get inquiries throughout the year, and it is a seasonal thing. So my eggs hatch, roughly around July, and I'm generally sold out by January. But I'm getting emails throughout the year wanting to buy stuff, and look, I'm sold out. And so when in the past, when I've gotten babies showing up and it's time to sell, I would go to everyone who's contacted me throughout the year, and I'd send them all an email. It'd take me hours because I didn't want to be BCCing people, and I wanted to send every person who contacted me throughout the year a personal email. And then it was kind of first come, first serve. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of really good keepers who were very motivated that did not have the opportunity to get a snake because they didn't respond in time. I think in 2019, I sold out of all my blacktails in less than 48 hours, and that was a couple dozen animals. And, they're not, they weren't bargain basement pricing either. I mean, this was retail pricing. So, in reflecting on that, I kind of felt bad that people were missing out, and I wanted to have a fair way for people to be able to do that. And so this year I started what I call the priority waiting list. Is, it's a waiting list where people who are motivated to actually get the animal, and they're certain that they want to work through me, which isn't everybody, and that's fine, that I would have them give me $100 reservation fee to get on a chronological list. And I have a spreadsheet of the first person that gave me money, the second person, and so forth. I have written on the spreadsheet, who wants what animal. And I wrote it all out on the terms of service on the website. And I told people also, listen, it's not about the money. This is about making sure that if you're really motivated, that you can get something from me and that you don't get, lose out of your chance. I mean, I've had people, telling me, hey, I've been on your waiting list for like 3 years and I haven't been able to get an animal from you. So I didn't want to lose those people. So I told people also that if you're a repeat buyer and you've bought stuff from me in the past, then you don't need to pay the $100. Just tell me what you want and I'll put you on my waiting list. And so far it's been great. Anyone who's like super motivated to get an animal from me gets on my list. And when I have animals in the fall, we'll see how it all plays out. But I think it'll be less stress and less work for me because I can just go to the top 5 people on my waiting list and offer them the snakes that they've been waiting for, and then go to the next 5 and just work my way down the list instead of just, dealing with anyone who emails me. I mean, I get, several hundred emails a year of people wanting to buy animals. And I'm sure anyone who has ever sold reptiles knows that a good portion of those are people that are not going to end up buying anything anyway.
Yeah.
So I didn't want those people to get in the way of the people that were really motivated and really wanted to work with what I have. So we'll see. It's been this sort of a test year for it. And so far I like the way it's looking. The next phase of it will be when I actually start fulfilling, orders with people on the waiting list. And I make it clear in my terms of service that there aren't any guarantees. I mean, at this point, all my females haven't even laid their clutches yet. I'm still waiting on some clutches, and some might be infertile, and I might have stillborn babies. And so I tell people, I can't guarantee you that you're going to get an animal this year.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you that when you're on the list, you're on the list, and I'm going to exhaust everyone in front of you. And whenever I have an animal to offer you, you're going to get it, as soon as I can get it to you. So far the feedback has been pretty positive about it. And we'll see where it goes from there, but work in progress.
Yeah, man.
So you were saying that breeding these species isn't exactly easy, and I've heard people say the same thing, and they also say that a lot of times they have a lot of issues with females being egg bound. Do you have any advice to people that are experiencing that?
Yeah, I've heard of other people having egg binding issues. I haven't really had many of that happen. It happens here and there. Generally speaking, if it's going to happen, it usually happens with a female that's got some kind of issue or somewhat compromised, or she's older, or a little too old, or maybe a little too young, or a little thin, or even on the flip side of that, maybe she's obese. So avoiding egg binding is really more about just keeping your animals healthy and in good shape. And so for me, that is, I try not to overfeed my animals. Obesity can be a problem. It'll lead to lower fertility rates, both for obese males and for obese females. Lower fertility rates, and then the odds of egg binding do seem to go up when you're working with obese animals. So indigos have got, I'm sure you've heard, the reputation that they'll eat anything and they've got really fast metabolisms, and all that's true, but you can get them obese. So there are a couple things I do to combat that. The first of which is obviously just the frequency and volume of prey items I give them, I need to manage. But secondly, I try to vary the prey. In the wild, anything from the Drymarchon genus, Indigos or Cribos, is going to eat pretty much anything they can fit in their mouth. And so I try to duplicate that somewhat. If you're feeding them, a big fat rat, even if it's only once a week, they're eventually going to get obese on you. So if I'm going to feed a rodent, it's usually a smaller sized rodent, and then I'll mix in a chick or something like that on top of it. So adding in poultry is important. Just having the rodents be, less than 100% of their diet is important. So adding in chicks, adding in fish. I know in your list of questions that you sent me, you were asking about roadkill snakes. I'll offer, being a field herper guy, I come across snakes that are freshly run over in the road too. I'll feed them that. I'll feed them, anything I can get my hands on, as long as I'm comfortable with the level of cleanliness and how sanitary it is that I'm feeding. I've fed them chicken necks before. Some people feed turkey necks. You can feed them fish out of the grocery market. You can get a catfish and cut up fillets, and they'll eat that. I know a lot of people are that keep the Indigos and Cribos are fishermen too, and they'll come back and feed them strips of bass or catfish or whatever they're catching. They love all that stuff. So anyway, it's not necessary for their survival, but if you want to start talking about avoiding egg binding and becoming a more successful breeder, the nutrition of the snakes is important. Making sure they don't get obese is important. And all those things are going to lead to greater fertility, less chance of egg binding, less chance of having babies that have defects. All those things are important. So diet is a big deal.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't think there's too many species outside of ball pythons and a few other animals that do that well with obesity.
Right.
Everything I've ever worked with, down to boas, skinks, even a lot of the klubers over the years, obese animals don't produce very well. And on top of that, usually there's issues that come up during production.
Right.
So I don't think
shorter lives too.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really believe in obesity with anything, especially when it comes to reptilians.
Yeah, Ben.
Thanks.
Oh, Ben's fine. Ben's average.
You are average. That's good. Wait a minute.
So, Dave, I know I don't want to jump in too much. Get you in here too. Do you have something you want to talk about as well, or?
Yeah. Okay, I got something. Okay, going into every breeding season, do you ever have a certain amount of animals you plan on holding back, or do you just wait for that special animal to pop up and then you go out of your way to hold it back? How does that work with you guys?
Well, I'll get into something that was on your one of the questions that was sent to me ahead of time too. Part of what I look at is when I'm holding back animals. Obviously, I need to evaluate my adults. Do I have adults that are starting to get older? Do I have adults that have not been producing well lately? Situations like that. And then I'm 5 years ahead. Indigos take longer to become reproductive than hognoses, for example. We're not talking about 2 years. We're talking about more like 4 or 5 years. So I try to have a 5-year plan. And I'm thinking to myself, in 5 years, what's my yellowtail Cribo breeding group going to look like? Or am I going to have animals that are going to need to be retirement age? Do I have animals that are, wild-caught imports like yellowtails or whatever else that maybe I can't count on to be long-term breeders for me? And that's how I kind of decide the quantity of snakes that I'm going to hold back. Whether it's purchasing something I come across that I like to be a future breeder, or something that I'm going to hold back. But the second element to that is a lot of people will, line breed, which is, commonplace in most reptile breeding things, whether you're breeding for a morph or whether you're breeding for a natural variation, a certain look or whatever else. I don't really do a whole lot of that. It's nice to have animals that are more colorful than the next breeder. It's nice to have animals that are like that. But for me, when I'm deciding what animals I want to hold back, it's a lot more about health. It's a lot more about lineage. It's a lot more about how robust and strong the animals are. And it's a lot less about coloration. So when I'm choosing babies to hold back, it's more that the sire and the dam are just big stud, awesome breeders. And I want to have some of that lineage for future generations, or a certain clutch of babies just came out really big and strong, and I'm just feeling really optimistic about them becoming big, strong adults. And that's kind of the criteria that I'll look at when I get my clutch of eggs and I'm deciding what I'm going to hold back. So it's a balancing act of a few things. It's figuring out where I need to be in 5 years, but it's also looking at the babies and saying, you know, which ones are the ones that are the genetics that I want to have, you know, in my breeding group 5 years from now. And that's kind of the thing. So, you know, less about color, less about morphs, less about any of that stuff. And it's more about just being robust and being strong. So that's kind of the plan.
Speaking of the genetics of it, something that we came across when we first got involved with Cribos it was like 7 years ago, is we didn't realize that the gene pool was so kind of close together and connected. And a lot of the people that were more advanced in it, unfortunately wasn't us, we're talking about how you could tell whether or not they're inbred or how closely they're related by the subcaudal scales being fused. They're supposed to have a zipper pattern at the end of the tail. And those would get fused the closer the genes are together.
Right.
And ended up selling our pair and finding out that it was slightly like one of them was fused, and it was surprised us. So do you know anything about like the gene pool, how it stands today, or any advice on that?
Right. So inbreeding is a problem of varying degrees depending on what subspecies you're talking about. The one that gets the most attention is the Eastern Indigo, because they have been limited for so long in bringing fresh blood into the pet trade. That, I mean, most of the animals, you know, that are in the pet trade for Eastern Indigos have been inbred to some degree. And what has started to happen is that there have been some defects that start popping up as a result. And maybe to a greater result than other types of snakes. I mean, people have been inbreeding, you know, other colubrids and pythons and whatever for generations and generations without a problem, whereas other morphs, other projects, or other subspecies, inbreeding tends to be a bigger deal where you get bug eyes or whatever else. So with indigo snakes, there are a few things that can pop up because of inbreeding. What's debated more a lot about that is exactly what those defects are and how big a deal the inbreeding is. The subcaudal scales issue is something that gets brought up a lot, and it's a pretty controversial subject, at least where I'm concerned about it, because what I've learned along the lines is that you can avoid some defects with different incubation and husbandry techniques. That I know for sure. But you combine that with being careful about what you're breeding and which animals you're choosing to hold back and what animals you're trying to breed, and you can start avoiding those issues as well. To my knowledge, I don't know that the subcaudal scales necessarily means that your animal's an inbred piece of garbage. I have some snakes that have some misaligned subcaudal scales that are very good breeders, produce very good babies, are strong and robust, and really have been great. And I have others that have perfect scales that are not. And so with all that, I kind of spent several years really just looking at that issue. And I have a spreadsheet on my computer where I keep track of the breeding history of every male and every female and every pairing, and you know which snakes have better fertility rates, which snakes produce babies that have those misaligned scales on the tail, and which snakes have tend to produce stillborn babies or whatever else. And I just kept track of all that data, and I did it for several years. And the animals that were not producing as well for me or through a lot of babies that had defects, I would get rid of them. Mm-hmm. And the ones that didn't, I would keep those, and I would plan my pairings that way. And eventually I, came up with an adult group of breeders that I felt really good about. And then at that point, there is a lab that's doing DNA testing on snakes, where with specifically Eastern Indigo snakes, where they can give you some indication of how inbred the animal is, and that you can use that data to be able to help you figure out which animals you're going to keep or not keep, and then which males you're going to pair with which females and so forth. And I just did that this year. And so when I got the results back, I was pretty pleased because compared to what I understood most other tested animals were coming out as, my animals scored really pretty well. I had animals that, at least according to this DNA test, were not very inbred comparatively to other Eastern Indigos, and which kind of supported my idea that all along, you can kind of tell when you're breeding them that when you're getting a lot of defects in babies, when you're getting babies that are smaller and weaker, you're probably looking at inbred parents, and the reverse would be true. So as far as the scale issue goes, in my mind, that having misaligned scales doesn't necessarily mean that it's terribly inbred and not a good breeder. In my mind, it means that it is probably a genetically inheritable trait, but I don't know that necessarily means that it's an inferior animal, which is what a lot of breeders and people that you read online will make you think. There might be a tendency that way. A lot of misaligned scales probably means that it's not a very genetically strong animal, but it's not an end-all be-all of how I evaluate the genetic strength of my snakes. So there are some defects that pop up that are actually harmful to the snake. One of which is if you have a very inbred animal, they're more likely to develop an enlarged heart, which is a tough thing because that usually doesn't develop until they're a year or two old. But the snake will be growing and they'll get a year or two old, and then you'll see kind of a bulge right about where the heart would be and a little swelling down there. And, which is frustrating because as a hatchling, it looks like a normal, healthy snake. And then eventually it develops an enlarged heart, which can end up being fatal. So there are some traits that are, some defects that can come up that actually be harmful for your snakes. Another one is dwarfism. So you'll get an Eastern Indigo that'll grow to about 4 feet, and then it stops getting longer and it just starts getting fatter. And that's, can shorten its longevity. But in my mind, an animal that should not be bred. So the long answer to your question is I don't put as much stock in the subcaudal scale issue as others do. But that being said, inbreeding is an issue that you need to be mindful of as an indigo breeder, and that you definitely want to make sure when you're pairing males and females that they're as little related as possible, and that you're careful about what animals you pair together. So whether you do the DNA test or whether you have some way to evaluate it, or you're getting animals from a male from a different breeder than somebody else, or whatever it is something you should be mindful of when you're pairing indigo snakes.
Cool. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about that, so just wanted to get your insight.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Dave, you want to jump in? I have a funny.
Shit. I don't know. Some of the Cribos. So you're limited with Eastern Indigos on what you can do, but with Cribos, how often do new animals come in the country?
It depends on the subspecies, right? So the most commonly imported one is the yellowtail Cribo, and those are imported in large numbers every year. The countries that most South American imports are coming out of are from Suriname and Guyana, and yellowtails are found commonly there. So those animals are what you see coming into the pet trade commonly. You can get animals legally imported out of parts of Central America, so you occasionally get unicolors or blacktails coming in. But as far as wild-caught stuff, it's really mostly the yellowtails, a little bit of blacktails, and unicolors.
Now, when those animals do come in the country occasionally, is that something you go after for the new bloodlines? Or are you just pretty happy with what you have and not really worried about it?
It depends on the status of my breeding stock. I got into a couple of years ago. I wanted to have some diversity to my yellowtails, so I did add some wild-caught stuff. But wild-caught adults, when you're doing that whole thing, that brings on a whole nother set of issues. Temperament generally doesn't really bother me because some snakes are mean and some are not. But wild caught adults tend to be pretty high strung, a lot more, able to stress out and therefore become defensive and therefore have a harder time adjusting to captivity and therefore adjusting to breeding and whatever else. A lot of wild caught animals come in with parasites that can be difficult to get rid of. A lot of them come in dehydrated. Snakes in the Drymarchon genus in general dehydrate very easily. And so sometimes you'll get what seems to be a healthy animal, but it hasn't had water in a long time along the chain of from collection to ending up in your snake room with all the steps it goes through. And, sometimes that'll do organ damage. It doesn't manifest itself for a couple months. So you have what seems to be a good animal, but, on the inside it's dehydrated and organ damage has been done. So anyway, long and short of it is, I try to avoid wild caught stuff unless I feel like my breeding group really needs a boost of fresh genetics. And then I'll go and do that. But in general, for the average person who wants to buy and potentially down the line breed a Cribo, I would really recommend going captive bred, because getting wild caught stuff it just comes with a lot more headaches. So, I charge more for a captive bred baby yellowtail than you would pay for a wild caught adult. But that comes with its benefits. Getting a wild caught adult, you've got all kinds of issues that you've got to deal with. So, I've spent a lot of years really trying to avoid the wild caught stuff because it is a pain in the neck. But I'll do it here and there if I really feel like my breeding group needs a boost.
All right. So like you said, there's not a lot of people in the United States that work with this kind of stuff. I believe, and I'm not sure if he still does, but Brian Sharp was doing a lot with Cribos at one point, or at least was doing some Cribo breeding.
Yeah, he still does.
Okay, awesome. And is it a gentleman out of Colorado? Is it Andy Watson?
Yeah, he does some stuff too. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, he's another guy, traveling a lot for shows. Your table really stood out to me when I was at the Pomona show, mainly because the Eastern Indigos. And there was a few other things that really caught my eye. You might have had some Cribo stuff out. And of course, I remember your 2 hognose you had on the table. And then, yeah, Andy, I get to see him whenever I go to the Denver, Colorado shows. And I don't want to boost his ego too much, but always been one of my favorite tables to see across the country.
He's got a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, great diversity. Really cool species. I got some Honduran stuff from him, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot more from him this year when I get talking. He wanted some blue tongue skinks. We'll probably, hopefully, do some bartering. But no, he always had really impressive stuff. But yeah, the Cribos, Indigos, I think everybody really always likes them. Very fascinating, but just nothing I've really jumped into yet. But I'm sure the day's going to come where I'm going to have at least one.
Well, you have to have something to do with all those stillborn ball pythons that you got to feed to something.
Exactly.
Yeah, I got friends with king cobras that are always knocking on my door. So
Well, what's funny about that is that when you're talking about size and shape and temperament, I've over the years I've sold snakes to many people who either are in a state where it's legal to or illegal to keep venomous stuff, or some of them have been zookeepers that work with cobras and things at work, but then they're not allowed to own them at home. And so, earlier this week, I got an email from a guy saying, "Hey, I really want a king cobra, but I'm not allowed to. So can I buy one of your Cribos?" Or someone saying, "Hey, I love working with the cobras at work at the zoo, and I can't have them at home. So can I buy some of your Cribos? Because they're pretty similar in size, temperament, intelligence, interactiveness, all that sort of thing."
Yeah, I think Cribos are extremely. I think it's a really awesome species. I think the first time I ever saw one was, at Barczyk's place years ago, and I feel like I go to that facility and there was 40,000 animals, and when I go to visit, I would just want to go see his Cribo. It's always really stood out to me.
Yeah, he had a pair of adults when we got ours, and when we first held them, so we're holding them, and this will bring me into a question I wanted to ask both of you guys actually. So we're holding them, and I think I had the male I think I had the male.
I had the male.
He had the male. I had the female.
I remember this distinctly because I thought I was going to get hemmed up.
So he gives me the male or the female, and I'm like, all right, yeah, this is cool. and I'm like, wow, it's really cool. Like I've held Eastern Indigos before. I'm like, but there's a black-tailed Cribo, and I'm like, this is really cool. And he gives the male to Ryan, and it's like going all over. Like
had to be an 8-foot black-tailed Cribo
into his shirt, like trying to go. I mean, everywhere, right? And he's just having a heck of a time handling him. Not that it was bad, but it was just very, very active. And mine, I was just like, oh, this is awesome. It was just hanging out, looking at me, you know. And while we're doing this, Brian starts telling us, and he had one of his other workers there too. The two of them are telling us about their worst snake bite that they've ever had was from a black-tailed Cribo. And Brian's like, yeah, you know, they don't really like, oh, let me go strike, like, or like, I mean, they do, and as you've said, that they power through, you know, whatever they're doing because they're not wrapping them up. But sometimes they could just like, oh, and it's just like, so Brian got bit under his arm, and the worker got bit on the back of her thigh, and they both said that was like the worst snake bite that they've ever had. So I'd like to get a little story behind, you know, each of you. What was your worst bite that, you know, that you've had? And it doesn't have to be with one of the Drymarchon, but just as a fun story that, you know, you always remember that one time.
Yeah, I've got one. So I'll go ahead and jump in here. Yeah, I mean, in general, Indigos and Cribos, you know, to add a little bit of extra background to all this whole thing, people will call them intelligent. And for me, a lot of that is that they've got this crazy, insane feeding response, which a lot of snakes have. But they figure it out very quickly. So I will often get the time that I need to be careful was when I first open the enclosure, you know, because that's when they think they're getting fed. And being just more athletic and agile than other snakes, you got to kind of be on your toes, especially when you're talking about an 8-foot animal. You know, but when you get it out in your hands, generally speaking, you know, odd things happen here and there, but they figure it out. They know immediately, hey, I'm not getting fed, and they're not going to bite me. But what the bite that got me to change all my procedures was I had an Eastern Indigo that was one of my more docile snakes. I mean, this was a snake that when I would have my kids' friends come over, that I would take out for all of them. You know, this is a super chill snake. But like most Indigos, it had a pretty gnarly feeding response. So I'd come home for being out of town. I fed my snakes, and I opened it up to take a look to see if the snake had eaten. And the enclosure was about face height, and I had to look up a little bit into the enclosure to see if it had eaten the rat, and clearly it had eaten the rat, and it wanted more. And before I could think, move, or do anything, I just saw the white of its gums coming at my face.
Oh, man.
And I jerked back immediately, just reflex, and it got a hold of the tip of my nose. And as I jerked back, I ripped, you know, my nose out of its mouth, and it immediately went back in the cage. It was fine.
Wow.
But, you know, I just had teeth marks just shredding the sides of my nose, and I was just bleeding like a stuck pig. And I yelled to my wife, you know, hey, get in here, you know, and she came running in, and she was worried, and I'm just laughing hysterically, you know, because I said, get a camera, you know, because it wasn't about, you know, the blood or, you know, needing a Band-Aid or something. It was more about, hey, I want to document this. And so I think I have it on my Instagram or social media somewhere, the photo of the aftermath of this bite. But, you know, my nose was all bandaged up. And I remember I was in the hardware store later that afternoon or the next day or something like that. And you know, this random stranger that was standing next to me in the cashier line said something to the effect of, you know, I hope the other guy looks worse than you. You know, it's a snake bite.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my story, and I don't have that snake anymore. But really, I mean, I have any of my snakes would be capable of doing that if you're not careful. So I get to, you know, that was where I needed to kind of change my procedures on how I approach my snakes. You know, open first, stand back, take a look, see what's going on with the animal, and if I want to handle them, I usually use a cage hook. No matter how docile they are, I use a cage hook to pull them out. I get a coil in my hands, and as soon as that happens, the snake knows it's not getting fed, and they're not going to bite me, and it's all cool. But you definitely don't want to lead with your face when you're checking an Indigo enclosure. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that we sold our blacktails was Ryan was like, hey, did you see this video? And there's a video, there's a bunch of videos, but there's
your video, by the way,
of a yellowtail. You open the bin and it launches itself out of the bin. Like
chases you like 12 feet across the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. It's that was actually, that video was of Orion, the snake I was telling you about earlier, my favorite snake. He's a lot bigger now, but yeah, in the summertime when it's warmer and they're kind of amped up and all of that, all they're thinking about is food, man. And you know, that happens regularly, you know. They just jump out and fly out and chasing. You just got to get a rat or chick in their mouth before they get their mouth on you.
My
Keep you on your toes.
My thinking behind that, because he says that's why we got rid of him. It wasn't because we were scared of getting bit by him. But our reptile room is we probably have about 6 feet of space in between there. And I'm like, I don't have enough runway. Like I need to get this, like you
gotta have an escape route.
So
yeah, that's funny.
Cool.
Dave, what about you?
Well, I hate to say it, I'm gonna lose all street cred on this story, but so my worst bite in the industry to date was from a leopard gecko. Real bitch story, just fucking God. I think I've only been doing this for like 5-6 years at the time. And I put a group together and I went in and this male just had this female. It tore an arm off, so I had to get in there. And I just wanted to go grab him, and he just grabbed the tip of my finger, and I swear to God, he bit down so hard I thought he was going to break his jaw in half. And this went on for a good like 5 or 10 minutes, and it just kept on feeling like it kept getting worse. And again, I know it's a little bitch story. I'm sure there's been worse, but for me personally, that's the worst bite I've ever taken in the reptile hobby.
That's appropriate, actually.
That's a good one.
We go in with the anthills with a snake hook because of their feed response. So like this long.
He's like this long, but it'll take your face off.
Sure.
Yeah. But no, that's my standout bite. You know, I've taken some good boa ones over the years, and some nice teeth have been left behind. But yeah, that pain, man, that I never forget that pain. But yeah, that's my little bitch story, pretty much. I'm sorry, it's not as cool as yours, but yeah, mine's a leopard gecko. Yeah.
The Cribos have a really interesting bite too, because we're used to getting bit by ball pythons all the time, and they kind of just puncture you and let go. I was harassing the Cribos we had because I really wanted them to stay still to take a picture. My fault, you know what I mean? Like, try to keep a Cribo still, just don't do it.
Even a juvenile, yeah.
But it's just a little baby. It didn't really hurt, but it latched onto my finger, and I was like, "Oh, that's funny." And then it started sawing, and I was like, "What is that?" There's like these laceration marks, like a 1/4 inch of my finger. Like it was trying to saw a piece of my finger off. Like, what the heck is this?
Yeah, I heard you mentioning it earlier, kind of alluding to it, but you know, being the Indigos and Cribos, they just have a whole different approach when they're coming towards their prey. You know, it's you don't really get it until you've witnessed it. You know, when you're feeding your animals, and you know, and then when you have an 8-foot snake doing that, it's crazy. But they're not venomous and they're not constrictors, so they kill their prey just by biting, crushing, overpowering, doing whatever they can do to overcome it. And so it's pretty intense. I mean, they don't just squeeze, and they don't just let their venom do their work. They have to actually go out and kill what they're trying to eat. And so the jaw strength is incredible. The teeth are razor sharp. You know, because they don't constrict, most snakes, they're going to grab and pull in so they can get their coils around it. Right. Yep. But indigos, they don't constrict. So they don't think about doing it that way. They don't grab and pull in. They will literally just punch the animal they're trying to get with their face. And so they grab and they shoot through it. And so and you kind of see that video you were referring to about my yellowtail, is that it's not going to snap and try to grab a mouse and pull it in. It's going to launch itself at the prey item. And when it bites it, it's going to push it, you know, a foot past where it initially was standing. You know, it's going to try to knock it across the room. And that's part of how they subdue their prey, you know, just a blunt force thing. So there's a level of intensity that's different with the Indigos and Cribos than with most other snakes. I think it's pretty cool.
And as a disclaimer, we're not bringing this up to scare anybody off of this. These are some of the reasons why these are awesome animals.
Yeah.
Right.
Keep them, not to discourage anybody from wanting to keep these things.
Yeah, it is. It's a super cool feed response. That video partly you're like, oh man, I want to make sure I have the right setup for this. But then the other part, you're like, that is so cool. Like this snake is like freaked out. It's such a cool animal.
Right. Well, but like I said, it's along that subject of encouraging or discouraging people from, getting, I think anyone's got to do their research and know what they're getting into, regardless of what species they're going to do. And you got to know everything that can happen, feeding response is something that everyone's got to consider as well. But again, along those lines of the feeding response and supposed intelligence of a reptile is that they really do figure it out. I've had a lot of snakes, rosy boas and Taiwan beauty snakes and whatever else. If they feel flesh, it doesn't matter if you smell like a mouse or not, they're going to bite it and they're going to try to swallow it. Indigos are not like that. They really don't do that. As soon as they figure out they're not getting fed, which is usually pretty early, they just stop, and then they're super chill animals. So that's kind of what makes them fun, because they're interactive, they're intense, they're gnarly, but at the same time, they're pretty chill, once they figure out they're not being fed, which is pretty quick. They figure it out quickly.
Understand their psychology, really.
Yeah, exactly.
So you also, speaking of snakes that are super chill, you're working with Mexican tiger rats, right?
Yes.
And I think I saw pictures of you catching out eggs. You had success breeding them?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that it's been consistent. I'm still working on it, man. I've been trying for a lot of years and I've only gotten one clutch. So I would by no means consider me an expert or try to pick my brain on what I'm doing right or wrong. I can tell you what I'm trying, and I can tell you a lot about what's not working.
I'd love to hear that stuff, because
exactly.
I talk with people all the time about it, and they're like, dude, I don't know.
Well, you hear all the stuff about, misting and doing things to spark breeding and whatever else. I currently have a female, my most colorful pair from Tamaulipas. I can feel eggs in the female. I can feel all the lumps. And so I'm waiting for her to lay, hopefully. But, last year I felt all the lumps too, and she reabsorbed them or something. She never laid. So I'm keep my fingers crossed. I think the one I did produce was kind of more of an accident. So we'll see how it goes. Those snakes are really neat. And the Mexican ones are quite a bit different than the South American imports that you see all the time. It's a completely different animal in temperament and husbandry and all that kind of stuff too. So they're neat. I like the Mexicans.
Yeah, they're a beautiful animal too.
Yeah.
So with Cribos, Indigos, everything we're talking about now, do you typically have one male for one female, or sometimes the extreme of 2 males per female, or how does that work in your home?
I don't spread them as far across as other people, as other species might be, king snakes or hognose or whatever. I'm generally, once I get more than, I would say 3 would be kind of 3 females to a male is already kind of pushing it with fertility. I've done it when I've had to, when I have a lot of more females than I have males for whatever reason. But I'm generally trying to do no more than 2 females per male. I try to just do 1. A lot of that is too, echoing back to our conversation about inbreeding, is that I don't want to offer people pairs of snakes that are siblings. I don't want to offer people pairs of snakes that have the same father but different mothers. I want to offer people snakes as unrelated as possible. So with that, I try to use a male on as few females as I can get away with. And that's kind of sort of the idea. When I sell somebody an unrelated pair, I want it to be totally different mother, totally different father. The 2 dads were not related to each other. The 2 moms were not related. So part of that is just building a really large and genetically diverse breeding group to start with. And once you kind of get to that point, you can have the flexibility to be able to pair things that will produce, totally unrelated animals. So that's kind of more of the goal. Instead of trying to put 1 male to 5 females, I rather avoid those situations. And even beyond that, it doesn't really work as well as far as fertility goes. You really if you start trying to put 1 male to 3, 4, 5 females, you're going to have some of the females not produce at all, and some of them will have poor fertility. It's just not worth it. I generally don't go more than 2 females.
All right. Well, extra males sometimes, I've had a few species where I've actually had it lopsided, where I've had 2 males per 1 female, just because you never know. Will you use 2 different males on one female, or because you're trying to keep really good track of your lineage, you typically just one-on-one?
It's generally one-on-one. There are times when I use 2 males on 1 female, but I would rather know for sure who the sire is,
Okay.
so I can keep track of, the lineage of all the babies, So it's rare that I'll do something like that. I've done it before, but I really I want to know exactly who the father is and who the mother is, partly just so I can express that to my buyers, but also partly because I want to know for the future honing of my breeding stock. I want to know who are the good breeders, who's really throwing good clutches, so I can, really keep my breeding group top notch. And if I'm uncertain about which male produced a clutch, I would rather have the female not produce at all. And so I can know who to blame for it,
Right on.
What's the biggest and smallest clutch you've had? Like, what can people expect?
So the indigos in general, whether you're talking about the Texas indigo, the Eastern indigo, or the Mexican indigo, those 3, they will generally have larger eggs but smaller clutch sizes on average. The Cribos, on the other hand, the yellowtail, the unicolor, and the blacktail, they will tend to have smaller eggs but larger clutch sizes. So I've had yellowtail and blacktail clutches over 20, between 20 and 25. I don't remember what my record is, something like 24, 25. But, the average is still kind of more in that 15 to 20 area for a Cribo. For indigos, I might, average clutch size is 6 or 8, and sometimes I'll get a 10 or a 12. I think my record for an Eastern indigo was 14. Texans can often throw a little bit more than Easterns, 10 to 15 area. But it's not uncommon to get a clutch of 4, 3,
Wow.
that kind of thing, especially when you are mixing in infertile eggs. You might get a clutch where there's 8 eggs and only 3 are fertile or something like that. And that's something I need to look at to try to figure out why that happened.
Now, I didn't mean to interrupt. This is a random question and probably completely off, but so some species that'll eat their infertile eggs are indigos like that?
I've never seen it.
Right.
The first time I ever saw that was with hognoses.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that with hognoses. I've seen them eat fertile eggs.
That was actually one of my more annoying things. Quick subject change with hognoses was that I don't even remember what the genetics were, but it was some kind of triple het to triple het or something that where I need, I wanted to have a large clutch to improve my odds of producing a certain look or morph or whatever it was. And, I went to go to work and I saw the female laying eggs as I was, walking out. I figured, oh, great, I'll have a clutch waiting for me when I get home. When I came home, the female was totally thin and empty of eggs, and there were no eggs in the egg box, and she had one in her mouth and was actually swallowing it. And so she had laid a clutch and then ate the entire clutch in the span of my workday, which really, didn't make me happy.
That'd be awesome.
Junior has a million stories like this. We should have talked to it because you could have seen him get really aggravated about it. But
so annoying.
I mean, he's told me stories where females, as they're coming out, would eat them. He's told me stories where female will literally eat as many as possible and then just start regurgitating eggs. Like
hognoses are. Listen, hognoses are a lot of fun. I don't mean to insult anything, but when you're talking about the levels of intelligence and survival skills and fitness, I kind of put indigos up here and hognoses, and no offense, guys, maybe ball pythons kind of down in here.
I've never heard a ball python eat their clutch.
Yeah, that's true. I wouldn't call them intelligent either, but that's just me.
They make it work.
That's true. That's true.
So one of the things I was curious about, and I heard in one of your other interviews, that you will kind of gut load the prey items with a supplement powder that you put in a gel capsule inside of them and feed them to the snakes.
Right.
How did you, one, come up with that idea, and why did you think it was necessary?
Well, part of it was just really looking at how diverse their prey sources are in the wild and wanting to kind of replicate that as much as possible. As far as the actual substance of the capsule, I'll be honest, actually know less about it. It was an idea that my partner brought to me, which is another kind of cool thing about the partnership that I have with him, is that he comes up with some really cool ideas and I come up with some cool ideas. And between the two of us, that collaboration has really helped fine tune things and led to some success. But I think it was something that was a blend that was used for amphibians or something like that. And we did that, and we added some calcium and some other stuff, and we kind of created our own little powder, and we put it in veggie capsules and started putting them in there. And we've just found the snakes to be happier, healthier, more fertile breeders, bigger clutch sizes, and all that sort of thing. And that idea kind of reinforced the whole concept of wanting to diversify their prey. So that's when we also started offering more chicks, more fish, whatever else we could that was not a rodent, to mix in there. We still do rodents, but it kind of reinforced that idea.
Do you use UVB on any of your animals?
I don't. I've never found it necessary. I haven't even really experimented with it, so I couldn't really tell you if there would be advantages to it. I can just tell you I haven't found it necessary.
Okay, fair enough.
So, do you do any barbecuing?
Yeah. I'm actually a little bit handicapped in the barbecuing area. I can do burgers and dogs. What.
Well, the main reason I asked that, when you're talking about your diet with these guys, have you ever seen it where they take a chicken and they stuff it in a turkey and then they stuff it in a lamb and then that gets up a cow? You ever thought about doing that with your diet? Starting out with a mouse and jamming in a rat and then jamming that in a chicken and sticking that in a fish and then just getting it all knocked out at once?
Yeah, and then letting the snake eat it. Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, I'm sure you can do something like that.
Sounds cool and all, but I'm just saying, there might be a better way.
There could be a better way. Listen, I like to eat. I don't like to cook as much, but I've had turducken before. Have you had turducken?
I have not had turducken yet.
Same idea. I think they'd shove a duck up a turkey.
Yeah, no, it sounds delicious. Anytime you could stick any animal, another animal, and eat it sounds great to me. But
listen, you and I think alike.
Live my life by those rules.
It gets out of hand. I once was looking up the recipe for turducken, and there's contests where to see how many animals you can fit together in one meal, and I think it's 11 is
wow.
And you're like, what? When you look at and you watch these YouTube videos of people doing it, it's kind of crazy.
You'll be surprised what you can fit into a camel hump.
Yeah.
Oh man. I don't know where I want to go somewhere else with that, but I keep on picturing what Dave was saying about with the animals and I just can't. Okay, let's reel that.
Don't let my nonsense mess up a good conversation. You guys just carry on with some good questions. I'm just gonna throw my retarded 2 cents every once in a while.
No, that's good.
Well, listen, to bring that conversation kind of back to the indigo part. I mean, it's not too far off. I mean, you read some of the studies about the gut contents of eastern indigos and things, and I've read they'll eat a baby alligator, they'll eat turtles. Wow. They'll eat birds. I mean, literally anything that can fit in their mouth, So reading through some of the studies about gut contents of wild Drymarchon is pretty interesting too. I mean, in one snake, you could have a baby alligator, a turtle, a bird, and a frog, and whatever else. I don't think they were all stuffed in each other and set on a barbecue, but
Oh, depends. I mean, there's you have eastern indigos being found in Alabama now, so I feel like if there's anywhere that could be possible, I'm thinking it's Alabama.
Could be.
So I know earlier you were talking about how some people have trouble starting some of the babies, and so we have not really with ball pythons. They're generally pretty easy, but we have the anthills that are a bit tricky. We have some of our Asian rat snakes can be a little tricky. And there's a bunch of different ideas of how to get them started with scenting or whatever. And Justin Julander is the children's python guy in the United States. And he's wrote books and stuff like that. And One of the things he does is he'll boil a rat pup for a children's python or a mouse pup, and so it's almost like a cooked meal. Have you ever tried to feed cooked animals to any?
I actually have not, and it's actually on my list of things to try. I try to take the approach of that I'm never going to be in a position where I know it all, and there's always something to learn from somebody else, and there's always a better way. And I've sort of approached my reptiles, with that sort of mindset all along. And that's actually something that a friend of mine was talking to me about in getting smaller colubrids feeding, gray banded king snakes and whatever, would be to boil a pinky. So I have not tried that yet, but it's on my list of things to try. If I can find something that'll work better than my current strategy, I'm going to use it.
I mean, do you run into a lot of trouble feeders with Cribos and Indigos?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the problem is that, when you're talking about a gray banded king or something, if it doesn't want a mouse, it wants a lizard, and you kind of know what they want. But being such prey generalists in the wild, when you have a baby Drymarchon, you don't know what it wants. If it doesn't want a rodent, it might want a lizard, it might want a frog, it might want a fish, and one snake might want one thing and a different snake might want something else. So that can be kind of the challenge. You're not just scenting with one thing. So I've used fish, I use frogs, I've used lizard, I've used snake as a way to try to entice them to, eat a rodent. There's a whole bag of tricks that you have to have if you want to be an indigo breeder and have a bunch of babies to get feeding. That's for sure.
Yeah, we haven't brought up quail. Is quail anything you use with the species?
For sure, they love them.
Yeah,
they
it
love
seems
them.
like it quail. If son doesn't eat, you just give it a quail, or at least quail.
In general, my go-to with baby Drymarchon is fish. Because just the something about the oil and the odor will get them going a little bit more than other things. But like I said, some don't want that at all, and some will respond a lot better to chick or to quail or something like that. So really, the scent that I use the most is fish, and second would be poultry, whether it's chick or quail or something like that.
What kind of fish are you using?
Usually I just use silver sides, which I just buy in a frozen pack from Petco or PetSmart, and they use them for feeding, aquarium fish, and I'll just buy them in a frozen pack and do that. And what I like about those too, if you're not familiar with what they are, they're kind of minnows, guppies, they're just a couple inches long. And so if scenting a pinky doesn't work, sometimes they'll just eat the fish, which is good too. And I know a lot of people will use goldfish, on getting baby indigos to feed and stuff like that. Live ones too, because they'll flitter around in the water and that'll perk up their visual senses. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I've used just fillets from the supermarket too. I have friends that have had a lot of success getting babies feeding just off of, bass they catch in the lake by their house, and just cutting little cubes up and they'll eat that.
Interesting. You ever this came up with Junior last week and something works for him on his trouble feeders, sardine oil.
Yeah.
I have not, but I'll bet you it would work.
Yeah, if you said just that intense, strong smell and flavor, that's something he started trying a few years ago and it worked for him.
Yeah, I'll bet it would work. I'll give it a shot.
Also works with tigers.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
Yeah, that's what I heard on last episode too, guys. Let's work on this new material.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
Any
Ryan has like this list.
Yeah.
I did have a list, but so the gene pool on Eastern Indigos is limited because of their status. Is there any way to legally kind of diversify that? Like, is there any programs or ways that you could, bring in?
Let's not that I know of.
No.
There are groups that are breeding Eastern Indigos with the intention of reintroducing them in the wild, and that's obviously not something you can do as a private citizen. But to my knowledge, there's never been any collaboration with the feds or with a group like that to be able to allow an influx of wild genetics into the pet trade. So it's something that's needed in the pet trade, but I don't know that conservation agencies or the government really cares very much about the genetic diversity in the pet trade.
Right.
Yeah.
So I haven't really heavily pursued it, but I focus a lot more on just trying to make sure I have the strongest and best genetically speaking animals that I can within the pet trade.
So, go ahead. You got something. Let's see it.
I do. I got tons of stuff, but I don't want to
Well,
I'll take a turn, and then Dave.
Had anybody hit you up part of a sting operation, try to get you to sell it illegally?
Yeah. I mean, the only real when you're talking about just domestic sales, obviously international is a whole nother deal. But when you're talking about domestic stuff, the only thing that's protected or restricted in any fashion is Eastern indigos.
Mm-hmm.
They are federally protected. They're listed as threatened on the Endangered Species Act. And so what that means from a keeper perspective is that that states are the ones that can dictate what you can own. The feds can't dictate that. So every state has a different level of protection for Eastern indigos. Most you're allowed to keep them without restriction. But like Alabama, for example, or Georgia, you just can't keep them at all. But what the feds can do is that they can regulate interstate commerce. That's kind of more of their jurisdiction. So I cannot sell an indigo outside of California unless someone first obtains a permit. It's called a federal interstate commerce permit. And so, I don't know that there were ever stings or anything like that, but buyers will, want an Eastern indigo from me and they don't want to go through the process. And so they'll say things like, hey, I'm in Colorado and I want to buy an Eastern indigo from you, but I don't want to get the permit. How about I just drive to your house? And that's, not cool,
That's a sting operation.
Yeah, it could be, who knows, and I'm a very, by the book as far as all that kind of stuff goes. And it's not hard to get the permit anyway, but people will try to talk me out of, making them get the permit. That's for sure.
So you said the permit's not hard, and that was actually my question. So Dave really led into it really well. How you say it's not hard? What is exactly on the permit like?
Yeah, well, so the basics of it is that they're going to charge you $100, and they're going to make you fill out a bunch of paperwork, and then they process the permit on whatever speed their office is running at that moment. It generally will average 2 or 3 months to process the permit. It could be more. It's often more. And sometimes it's less. But essentially, if I wanted to narrow it down, they just want to know as a buyer that you know what you're doing. And so they'll never deny your permit. They won't just say no. But what they'll do is they'll send you your application back, and they'll say, hey, I didn't like this answer. Can you tell me more about that? And if you just word your answers in a way that's going to make the feds happy, then they'll give you your permit. So it's a pain in that it takes time, and there's some paperwork, and you have to craft your answers correctly according to what they want. And I help people with that process. But if you write all the correct things and you send it in, you'll get the permit. You won't get denied. You're just going to have to be patient and wait and take your time and know it might take several months, and then you're good to go.
So I had something else that I wanted to add to that. So it's $100 and blah, blah, blah. It's easy to do. Is it something? Oh, yeah. Sorry. Is it something that you need to have the buyer lined up before you can get the permit? Or could you just say, I'm getting the permit, and then in a couple months, I'm going to find a buyer?
No, and in fact, this is one of my most frequently asked questions. And that is that you can't really get the permit before you first reserve the snake. Part of the permit application asks for information from the breeder about the specific snake you're buying. The breeder has to supply a breeder statement that says what the buyer is buying, and they want to approximately know when the date of birth was. They want to know identifying characteristics and whatever else. So you can't really apply for the permit before you've first chosen the breeder and you've chosen the snake.
Wow.
So my general procedure is, if you live outside of California where I am and you want to buy an Eastern Indigo from me, the first thing you need to do is reserve a snake with me through a financial deposit.
Mm-hmm.
Give me some money to reserve the snake. Then this is after the snake hatches. I forgot that step. First, the snake hatches. I offer you the snake. You see the picture. You like it. You want to buy it. You give me some money to hold on to it. And then we'll do the permit. And so the buyer, the permit is for the buyer. So the buyer applies for the permit. They get all the questions together. I help them answer all the questions. I give them guidance on how to write their answers in a way that'll make the feds happy. I provide them with the breeder's statement with all the information about the snake they're buying. And then they submit it to the feds. 2, 3, 4 months, whatever it is later, their permit gets approved. Then I ask for the balance of the money and a copy of the permit. Then I ship you your snake.
Wow.
And it's from what I understand, it's per shipment. You need this, right?
Correct. So the permit is voided once you receive your snake. It's over. What the permit does is it allows a box of snakes to go from one state to another state. So it doesn't matter if there's one snake in the box or 10 snakes in the box. You need one permit for one shipment. And as soon as you receive the shipment, it's done.
Cool.
That's good information to know if you want to get them, for sure.
Right.
Now, last little detail on that. So now somebody purchases an animal from you, and let's say they live in Pennsylvania and they decide they're going to move to Wisconsin. Do they have to start the paperwork all over again legally to be able to take it to Wisconsin with them?
Right. Another frequently asked question. It's an interstate commerce permit, and the word commerce is important. If you own an animal and you move from one state to another, there's no commerce happening. Therefore, you do not need the permit.
Okay.
So it invites a little bit of a gray area that some of those people that want to avoid getting the permit and the work are going to try to swindle me over. But, technically speaking, if you are bringing your own animal from one state to another and there's no commerce happening, you don't need the permit. If I wanted to gift you a snake, I could technically do that because there's no commerce happening. And that's the gray area that some people try to wiggle around with. But if I am selling you an animal, that's commerce. If I'm trading you an animal, that's commerce. So as long as there's some sort of compensation going on, you're supposed to get the permit. And if there's no compensation going on, you don't need to get the permit.
And how do you get gifted a snake from you?
Everybody doesn't happen.
What if we
can't get them one of the midgets that are non-functional anyways?
Yeah, it's while in my years of figuring out the genetics and reducing birth defects and so forth, in the odd event that I would produce an animal that I wasn't comfortable selling, I would generally gift it, usually to an educational facility. I get approached by those people quite a bit, particularly in the Southeast, and they want an Eastern Indigo that is part of their education program. So I donate them here and there, but they're usually animals that, I'm not going to be able to sell,
Gotcha. Hey, Dave, I'm sorry. Somebody just called in and said it's not midget snakes. It's actually small snake.
Little snakes.
Little snakes.
Yeah, don't edit that out. It's midget, and it's always going to be midget.
You heard it here.
I'm sure the snake will not be offended. I promise.
I don't know. Indigos are pretty smart.
I don't know many indigos, so I can't back that up.
So sort of divergent off the topic, it's something I'm curious about. Last I heard, you had Galapagos tortoise eggs incubating, and
right.
We're hoping to see some babies.
So that's generally my partner's thing. I'm involved in it peripherally. My partner does all the Drymarchon with me, but he also does a ton of tortoises. So he and his wife are really doing a great job with all that stuff. They're called Rodriguez Chelonians. If anyone wants to look it up, they're on social media and whatnot, and they do all types of tortoise species and whatever else. And most of it I'm not involved with. The Galapagos is, I am involved with to some level of partnership on that. And so we've been working on getting those bred in California. So we have gotten clutches of eggs, and we have not yet gotten actual hatchlings yet. So we're working on getting that process going from breeding through to actual hatchling babies. So some of the eggs have been infertile, and we have a clutch in the incubator now that we're hopeful is going to end up being fertile. I guess I can't speak too much about this stuff because tortoises aren't really my deal. But I understand you can't candle them right away. That there needs to be some vein development, which takes a couple months to do. Anyhow, so so we've got some clutches in the incubator that we're hoping are going to be good, and we're just part of the process. But what I've learned with tortoises is that when you're talking about tortoise breeding projects, that you have to go at tortoise pace, go to tortoise speed, and you got to have tortoise patience to be able to do that sort of thing. It's not like the snakes where you're buying snakes and you're expecting babies in 2 years. Yeah, no, but they're a lot of fun. My kids, my wife, my family, we really enjoy working with them. And we hadn't had a whole lot of experience with tortoises. And a few years ago, there was a fire near my partner's ranch, and we had to relocate them to my backyard. And so we had them there for a couple months while we got things up and going again at the ranch. And I can tell you, for being a non-tortoise person, I didn't get it at all until I actually could spend time with them every day. And I'd see my partner's tortoises all the time. I'm over there all the time. But until I saw them every day, you just don't get it until you really see them. And starting with Galapagos is over sulcata or something lame like that. You're starting with the Ferrari right out of the gate. You know what I mean? I mean, the level of personality, emotion, and intelligence that you have with these large land tortoises is phenomenal. You just don't really get it until you do it. And I'm convinced that they know their own names. They come to see you. We had a different relationship with each animal. I mean, you have a level of interaction and sociability that you just don't really get, and it's absolutely awe-inspiring, when you're actually able to have the time to do it. And there are some that'll come and just rest their head in your lap and just want scratches, and others that are more standoffish. And I learned once we started adding different individuals to our herd that there's a social hierarchy between the animals themselves, and they have their own relationships with each other too. It's just really neat. You just don't really think of reptiles as being social or emotional and having this sort of psychological stuff going on in there. And I'm telling you, I was around these tortoises for a few years, and it wasn't until I had them in my backyard that I got it. And there's something special, I have to tell you. They're really cool.
That's awesome, man. We gotta get some go up.
So, how big's your herd?
Well, our problem is we have plenty of females, but we only have one male. So he's a busy guy. So we're working on that, and some of them, some of the animals are on loan from some other people, and our male we own. And, so he's doing a great job of breeding everybody. Now we just need to get the fertility issue figured out, and I think we're close.
So I was down at Ty's place, and we were talking a little bit about these. For males to be good breeders, don't they need to be like 40 to 50 years old before they really take off?
I would suspect that's probably right. We're still learning on this. Most of the animals in our herd are somewhere in the 30-year area. Which, as I understand, again, I'm fully not the expert here, which I understand is sort of the beginning of their sexual maturity. So I suspect that some of our infertile clutches have been due to that. They're just sort of early first breeding attempts at some young adult animals. And so our male, man, I don't know exactly how old he is. He's somewhere around between 30 and 35, something like along those lines. And so hopefully the best is yet to come.
Well, I wish you luck, man. I'd love to see that.
Tortoise patience.
I hope so. Yeah, that's what it is. It's tortoise patience. You got to work on their speed.
That's it. Only another 10 years. You're good.
Wow.
That's right. It might be another 10 years. Who knows?
Wow.
That's cool though.
Sorry, I'm just like thinking. I'm just picturing all what you were just saying. Just I like large tortoises. I think they're really cool.
Yeah,
You
they're a
guys
lot of
just
fun.
don't plan on being in the hobby in 40 more years, so there's no reason to buy one.
No. Well, that's part of the thing too. It's obviously without getting, we don't have hatchlings available yet, but it's, from a business perspective, it's a whole different approach. You talk about in the hognose world, every time you sell a pair of snakes, you've got a future competitor for you 2 years later.
Yeah.
As you're selling animals to people that are going to be breeding them and reproducing stuff. And I remember when I was doing hognose stuff, people were getting mad at me for, selling a lavender at a certain price because I'm going to drop the price. And let's say, hey guys, look, in 2 years, you're going to have, you're selling 50 lavenders a year. What do you think is going to happen? The market's going to catch up to it. But when you're talking about Galapagos tortoises, hey, listen, by the time all my competitors are going to catch up, I'm going to be in the ground.
That's right. Yeah, I've always said it, like shinglebacks being in the skin community. I've always wanted shinglebacks, but the whole process in shinglebacks is, first off, you have to hope to buy a pair of babies, which is impossible in the first place. They
Right.
bond for life, so if you try to buy a couple adults, if they happen to pop up on fawn or whatever, they're probably never going to breed. You're $10,000 a piece. You finally get a baby. If you're lucky, you're not going to fucking sell it because you're going to want to keep it. And they're only having 1 or 2 babies at a time. So
Right.
you don't really buy a thing like that because it's going to get you rich. You kind of just get it because you want it.
That's right. At some point, some of these animals just don't lend themselves to, being a get rich animal, or rich is the wrong word to use. Nobody's getting rich in the reptile trade, but
Yeah, you don't.
you just get them because they're cool, and you obviously need to be in a certain financial position to spend 10 grand on something just because it's cool.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a return out of it.
Is whatever the going prices on Galapagos is these days, like 10,000, 30,000.
I'll tell you when we start selling them.
I think you can pretty much put any number you want on them, in all honesty, and it's not.
Similar to the Eastern Indigos, they're federally restricted too, and so in fact, it's quite a bit more stringent than the Eastern Indigos, and then it's a lot harder to get the permit to be able to move them across state lines. So, so that affects the marketability for sure, and we'll see. You can put any price you want on them, but it depends on where you live. If we're fortunate enough to be in California, which is, I understand, one of the larger tortoise markets, in the country. So hopefully we'll have a pretty wide base of people that have 5-10 grand to be able to spend on an animal. But if you live in West Virginia and you're breeding, Galapagos tortoises, you're going to be pretty restricted to the people that you can sell to. Because it is a lot more difficult to get that permit to be able to move them across state lines. So, when you're talking about the business perspective of a Galapagos tortoise, it really depends on where you live.
Yeah, I've been to West Virginia a lot. I don't think they know what Galapagos are out there, so I don't even think you have to worry about that market.
I can't comment on that. I've never been there. I just know it's a small state.
Yeah,
geographically speaking.
It's quite a big state. And you can say whatever you want. These people are not watching this right now. You have no concerns whatsoever.
Maybe I should say Rhode Island. Rhode Island's pretty small.
Yeah, but they, that's a little different there. They can afford them. They know.
So, not to derail everybody here.
Oh, we've been derailed. It's fine.
You're also working with a group of Barron's racers, right?
Yeah, I've had some success with that. It's been kind of a side project of mine, and just something that I kind of tinker with on the side. But I had a lot of fun with just the variation in the phenotypes with that. It seems to be kind of natural color variation in the species, and they're most of what you see in the pet trade are green. But there are some that are brown and there are some that are blue. And I thought the blues are really awesome. And I hadn't seen a whole lot of them out there. And so I aggregated a group of blue animals and bred them and thought to kind of take advantage of that. And so that's been pretty successful. They're really, really cool animals as well. They're obviously racers. They're from, Argentina, Uruguay, the southern part of South America, like that. And really cool personalities, really cool temperaments, very easy to take care of. Neat snakes. They are rear fanged. They're generally considered harmless to humans, but with the feeding response they have and the size that they have, it's something you want to be cautious of because you never know how you're going to react to something. But they're really neat snakes. I think they're pretty underappreciated.
What do a pair of them go for?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously depends on the color. I was selling blues for, the $500-$600 area each, kind of a thing, and greens are more like $150, $200, that kind of thing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think you're keeping arboreal setups, right?
They don't have to be. They actually will do pretty well in a rack as well if you wanted to keep them that way. I kept my stuff in an arboreal setup mostly just because I wanted to see them. They're so visually striking, but they're pretty hardy. I mean, you can keep them like a corn snake and they'll be okay. Yeah, they just get a lot bigger. I mean, some of my females are over 7 feet long. Wow. And they're active, so having space is a good deal. But as far as what they need or don't need, they're pretty hardy.
Is there a species that you're working with that people would be surprised to find out that you're working with?
Aside from Galapagos Tortoises.
Have any secret side projects going on?
Yeah, well, always playing around with something or other, Yeah, it's just little stuff that kind of we tinker with when we're kind of thinking about side projects. You obviously want something that's cool, and if I can make it financially worth my while, then that's something that, to look at as well. And then from the husbandry perspective too, some things are just not going to do well in my snake room. I mean, what we do is Drymarchon. That's what we do, and so the snake room is designed for that purpose. So the ambient temperatures, the way I heat and cool, the humidity, all those things. So when I'm looking at side projects, I'm trying to, keep that in mind. I don't want to have, we don't do any of the boids or anything like that. I don't want to have anything that I need to have a lot of heat on or whatever else. It just needs to be happy in the room where I'm in. So generally speaking, stuff that does pretty well with cooler temperatures, like the Drymarchon do or anything like that, are things that we'll, sometimes look at. But for example, just to throw you one, I've been I bought a few milk snakes from the Yucatan Peninsula, and as I understand the way the history goes, that there was a milk snake that came out of Mexico, made its way into the U.S. that was totally patternless, just no rings on it at all. It was just red, and then that was bred by my friend Shannon Brown many years ago, and that lineage got reproduced and into the petri. So I bought a bunch of that kind of stuff, which is really kind of neat because you get the classic tricolor look on some of the milk snakes, and then you get different degrees of aberrancies all the way down to just being a fully red patternless snake, which is a lot of fun too. So there's an example of something that I can keep easily in the way I have my reptile room set up, but that should have some financial profitability for me when I'm reproducing them. We'll see. But also just really cool stuff that just piques my interest.
Right on.
That's important. Okay, so I don't know if you've had the opportunity to go to South America to do any herping yet. And if you haven't, is that something on your list?
I have. I generally am not super interested for whatever reason with Asian stuff, whether it's field herping or captive stuff. I think a lot of the Asian rats are really cool. You guys were talking about that earlier, but I've never really worked with them. I just tend to be drawn towards New World type stuff. And that goes for field herping as well. So I've been to Costa Rica many times. I was just in Nicaragua a few months ago before all this craziness happened. And, Panama, Peru, Ecuador. I love traveling to all those areas. And some of it is just family travel. Some of it's, not herping related, but I try to get out and, come across whatever critters I can find when I'm down there.
Yeah. How often do you actually hit your target species?
Target species is a tough one. One of the cool things about the tropics, man, is that there is so much more diversity than most places in the U.S. that you can you could be hiking on a trail at night and you have no idea what you're about to come across. And that's kind of the allure of it. So, there are a lot of super common things that I've never found. You just didn't get lucky and come across it. And then I've come across some really cool stuff that's not commonly seen. One of my first snakes that I found in Costa Rica, which I really dug, was the Mussurana. And, I was walking through a stream at night, ankle deep in water, and I saw just a ripple in the water up in front of me. And this was a 6.5 foot snake that was swimming in the water downstream, right down the center, and it just swam right into my hands. And I just picked him up gently, and that was just a magical experience. A super cool snake. I went home and I invested in some and bred those for a while too. So, target species that I have not yet come across. I'd love to see a Bushmaster, but that's the top of a lot of people's list. Haven't really made a concerted effort to go after them, but that'd be fun. And then there are things that are just difficult to target, like bromeliad boas, for example, in Central America. If you're familiar with those, the genus is Ungaleophis. I would love to find one of those. I would have no clue how to even target those, but it's kind of one of those things you have to stumble across.
Fun.
Man, so how did you come up with the name Black Pearl?
That actually goes back to the Mussurana. I used to breed. One of my early breeding projects were Mussurana that I was importing out of Uruguay. And if you're not familiar with Mussurana, it's a colubrid that gets to be 6 to 8 feet long. They're kind of built like a king snake or a milk snake, but they're rear fanged, and they're natural snake eaters in the wild. And you kind of get my taste in snakes, in that they're big, they're powerful, they're strong, they're active. And I kind of fell in love with those after I caught that one in Costa Rica. So I started importing some different type of Mussurana, but out of Uruguay. And the guy I was getting them from had a piebald gene that was going on in him. And so you had this, 6-7 foot long snake that was jet black, but then it would have white splotches throughout the whole thing, up and down it. So it had this sort of dairy cow kind of a look. And that's kind of where the Black Pearl thing came from.
Wow.
It has nothing to do with Johnny Depp.
Oh, no pirates or anything. I was wondering.
I'm kind of sad now.
Yeah, well, there is a book called the Curse of the Black Pearl, which is kind of fun. It's a good read of mine. It's about diving for pearls in Baja.
Yeah, I probably won't read it, but you can tell us more about it.
Yeah, I don't know that you're really interested. I sense a little bit of sarcasm on your end there.
Well, I know you're focusing on me right now, but if you looked at those two guys after you mentioned that, they looked very disinterested also. So don't put this on me.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm not going to tell you more about it. I'm sure a lot of the listeners aren't going to go out and pick it up from Amazon.
I'm downloading it right now. It's on Audible, right?
That's cool. I'm always up for that kind of thing, actually. So it's not really out of my realm of books I listen to.
I think we hit all my topics. So
yeah, we're coming in on 2 hours here, and so I don't know, Dave, if you have anything else that you're like, hey, I really want to know, or
yeah, a lot of pressure like always. I don't know why he's
I'll give you
at the end. No, honestly, I think this is awesome. Like I said, I only experienced seeing your table a couple times at the shows, and I barely even got to talk to you when I did see you. But yeah, this was awesome. I definitely enjoyed all this. It's Cribos are definitely one. I love Eastern Indigos, but Cribos, just because the experience I had with a couple I've held, I've always really been fascinated with them, but just never bit the bullet on buying one yet. But
I hear you. Well, there's time.
we're hoping.
Well, I got a guy now, so I'm gonna.
You got a guy. You know a guy.
Yeah. All right, and then I just said you like a bunch of diverse animals. Have you ever thought about getting into like land mullets?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Land mullets.
Land mullets. Is that a hairdo?
It's a band from the 80s.
It's no, they're really cool skinks, man. Anyway,
He's not a lizard guy, man.
I know.
Yeah, lizards are what I know the least about.
He uses them to feed to his indigos.
Yeah,
Probably. That's usually the joke I have. Yeah. Sure. Send me some my way. My indigos are hungry.
If I had land mullets, I wouldn't.
Yeah, and leftover ball pythons, whatever.
Sounds like a plan.
We can have a trade here if you need ball pythons. You know.
Yeah, man, my snakes are hungry. They're always hungry.
All right.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. This was actually really fun for us, and I don't know if you got that intensity, because we just are really interested in the Drymarchon. So very fascinated, and I appreciate you coming on. This was great,
especially taking 2 hours out of your time, man. This is a long freaking conversation. But
yeah.
You know, it's funny. You get reptile guys talking. It time flies pretty quickly.
Yeah. So maybe after all of this is done, maybe we could do a herping trip or something, Dave. If we can, I was thinking about this actually the last few days, because Dave drives all over the place to do herping, and just with the amount of people, we should probably do, like, once all this craziness is over, do like a trip, Dave, where we just have, like, you know, maybe 10 friends or whatever, just kind of go and turn some rocks, you know.
Everyone meet at Dave's house.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of people going to all the secret places, but we'll figure it out. Yeah, if you do the Kansas City trip again, or head out to like you said, East Kansas, let me know. I'll come blindfolded. We'll hang out a little bit. I won't talk about it. I won't take any pictures.
There you go. Right on, guys. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks. So make sure everybody else that's watching like this video if you liked it, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. It's all that social media stuff. And
get on this guy's waiting list, because it's going to take you 5 years.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe so. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you so much.